Hey, AI, here you go. I don't care if it's Copilot, ChatGPT, or something tied to your ERP system.
What moves the needle first, or what moves the needle the largest? Where do I spend my attention? Because welcome back to the Raw Selection Private Equity Podcast. Joining us today is Nathan Sanders, a proven private equity-backed Chief Executive Officer who's operated in distribution, transportation, and consumer products industry. Nathan's going to share his journey of being a chief exec, all about acquisitions, processes, learning points, mistakes, and of course, the illustrious exit. But before we jump in, I just wanted to thank all the people reaching out to me with fantastic feedback on the podcast and how it's brought you value, supported you and your journey in the private equity industry. If you haven't already done so, please do leave a review for the podcast or give us some feedback, drop us a comment, etc. with regards to what we can do to improve. It doesn't have to be 5 stars if it's not. Give us 4 stars, but just give us some feedback on what we can do to bring you more value on the Private Equity Podcast. But without further ado, let's jump into Nathan and his chief executive journey. Nathan, if you could give us a 60 to 90 second breakdown of you, please.
Yes, well, the best way to describe myself is I'm a create value person, and that includes both my personal life and my professional life. From a professional life standpoint, I've always been the person that's raised my hand, even in early in my career, and be like, well, that's a challenging project, or this is a challenging customer, or, we don't know what to do. And I always felt that I could be the best member of the team to be able to help with that. And so, as I progressed in my career and gained leadership experience and, we'll call it the responsibilities that come with it, that value creation comes from those transformations and learning to ask questions and, really not focusing so much on like the fault, but what can we learn and how can we adjust and move and grow and, in essence, move forward. So that's really what I am. I'm a create value transformation guy. And again, it really applies to just every aspect of my life, just not just the business life as well.
Perfect. Appreciate that intro. So what's one mistake that you see private equity firms or portfolio companies making, and what actions would you suggest to correct them?
I'll call it the disease of right now. They have a right now challenge. And I will say that I see that frequently. So when I talk to private equity companies about, say even opportunities, that you have to pull them out of the right now and talk about the focus. So they always talk about once you fix this, then we can talk about the exit. Our plan is to exit in X period of time. We're a buy and hold, we're a buy and sell. But the challenge is that I'll call it year 1, year 2. So let's say it's a 3-year plan. Well, when the whole focus of the conversation is about year 1, well, are you bringing in the right leader? Are you bringing in the right team? Are you setting the right vision? And it's really the whole picture snapshot that is always a struggle to get to. And it's no one's fault. It's just that they have a challenge. We bought a company, it's not going well. We bought a company, we're struggling to integrate it. We need you to help us do the due diligence to determine if we should buy this company. All of the above, if you get caught up in that right now situation, which seems to be that conversation point, I think the more that we can take that long-term view and not just be like, well, once we get this done, then we can talk about the exit. I think that's the challenge points that any PE has, and it's rightly so. I mean, they need to get a return on their investment as quickly as possible, regardless of the situation. So it's very easy to focus on that right now. But you could hire the wrong person. You could build out the team. You could have the wrong vision focus at the beginning that then means a reset of your vision in the middle. All those things could be challenges, and that's why I always challenge PEs that I talk to. Hey, is this really the plan? Or is this a right now, and then we can talk about later. So that way we can truly understand the big picture of what's needed and what we need to do next.
It's interesting. I talk to a lot of private equity firms myself about that middle part of the investment. We always focus heavily on the issues, as you mentioned right now. We focus heavily on how do we get the business to an exit process, but there's that big gap of 3, 4, 5 years in the middle that needs addressing of where the business is going to get to. What are some of so when you've managed that as being in a private equity backed organization, what are some of the questions that you've asked that's drawn attention more to the next thing or the future challenges, or moving away from the right now to focus on value creation long term rather than just fixing whatever problem that there is?
Well, with every private equity, each situation is a little unique, but they have a lot of similarities. Did they purchase two private owner competitors and put them together? Did they purchase one with the intention of doing a roll up in the market? Did they purchase one or two with the intention of adding technology? And so that really drives that middle piece, as you just described, in terms of that question, because using technology as an example, you can decide that you need a new system, which will make your company better and allow you to grow. But what are you going to do until then? Because the site, the vision, the selection, the integration, and then getting good at it is not an overnight process. So what if you have to run for a year before you have the new system in place? And so focusing into the investment pieces that you would need to make to raise the value and create value in the business is where I really refocus the conversation. An example is on the technology piece. One of the companies, portfolio companies I was running, I walked in the door and it was pen and paper. It was barely email type situation. So we knew that technology was needed to move it from a phone call basis to the customers could self-select using business to business portals or direct to consumer, and just basically allowed the customers to see the inventory, select the inventory, see the capacity, et cetera. Before, everything was manual. So you need a new system, but you can't just go buy everything that you need in one spot and then instantly have it. So what do you buy first? What do you buy second? What do you integrate? And then of course, using your exit point conversation, do you need to buy everything based on who you're going to exit and how you're going to exit, drives those capital investments as well, both on a timing standpoint. Because again, if you're going to sell to a competitor versus say another private equity on a LCAP, recap, or a leveraged buyout, there's just so many conversation points in there, but turning that focus into what are we going to spend? What do we want that rate of return to be? What do we want that timing to be? Is where I found it to be successful, where the boards are like, yes, that allows us to really focus in on that middle part as you described it, because there's something to chew on. There's something to discuss rather than, well, what are we going to do? Because again, once you have that vision of what you're going to do in the middle, that ties back to what you work on first, the timing of it, and of course, what you expect from the team to be successful. And many times you're hiring or training people during that time frame, having that focus on what you need enables them to be very successful as well. Because again, your team, the sooner you can get them into your vision and heading all in the same direction, the faster you're going to hit any of those portions, whether it's the entry points, beginning or exit. So the team, I definitely don't want to leave that out because that becomes a major focus point. But again, understanding that middle allows you to really help the team focus so they can ensure their own success as well.
So you led Brooks Furniture to an exit. Talk to us about what you learned from, and that's private equity backed business, what you learned from that experience.
So every experience that every company I've ever worked for, the opportunity I take always has something that I've not done before. And with Brooke, it was at the end of the day, it was a furniture rental company, but it was primarily a final mile delivery company. We owned the process. And I've owned the process from a P&L standpoint, from an operational process, customer service, sales. I'm a forward front leading leader. And so I've always owned that process. But when you are going into a final mile delivery, you're going into someone's home, you're not just dropping it off on the porch. You learn so much about your consumer, about your team, about your company, and about yourself as a leader. What questions do I ask? What would I work on next? And, the experiences that I took from it, now that we've exited, I'm a better leader in terms of focusing the team on customer service because, again, you're standing in someone's home is much different than, while I'm dropping it off or I'm handing it off to a freight carrier who's going to drop it off on their porch. And so, that piece of it was definitely a deep experience. Another one is that every time you do an exit, you learn something else. Brooke has some challenges, which is why I joined Brooke in terms of growing the business. And then the pandemic hit, and so there was a whole series of, we already had this challenge. That challenge has been amplified by the pandemic, and I'll use one of our verticals, office. People weren't going into the office, so our office rental went away. It wasn't all of our revenue, but how do you overcome that pain point and how do you grow from that? And when do you flip to different verticals? How do you maximize your revenue and your volume within those verticals? How do you really tie into the ideal customer's demands within their profile? That was, I'll call it a deepening of any experiences I've had in and of itself, because, we were so challenged in terms of volume, because we had whole verticals like office that had shut down, that every order counted more than it ever had before. So learning about that deep customer service piece and making it so easy to do business with us. And again, we weren't perfect when I walked in the door, and then the pandemic hit shortly right after that. Building that team up, raising that up within that challenging environment. I would definitely say that next time I'm in a challenging environment where we need to get the team refocused, I've had to answer much harder questions more recently than I have ever had before. So, that focus on customer service, surviving during difficult challenges, and of course the financial aspect of it. It was obviously very difficult when your revenue decreases and your fixed costs remain the same. That financial focus, we've all are very good at that financial focus, but that experience of how everything ties together when the customer pays their bills and how they pay their bills, what you charge, because you couldn't do a price increase for many, many months, but you still had, a limited volume point when you had rising cost, that management, which was so intense, gains an experience point, even on that financial point. And again, it was just really an enhancement of any experiences I ever had before, to a degree that I think most of us hadn't been asked to solve before. And so that definitely was the three things that I took out of that experience for sure.
So, to unpack one of those areas, you mentioned the focus on customer service and the understanding of that, and going into people's homes, etc. What were the processes you put in place to gather that intelligence around customer service? Was that from the people who were dropping them off? Was that from the sales team? How did you increase, improve, and develop that area?
So when I first joined the company, I met with as many customers as possible and as many teammates as possible. So when I worked in the company, I would work in the functional area. So I sat on phone calls, I answered phone calls, I went on sales calls, I worked in the DCs, and I went on deliveries. And then, when I'm tying that to what the customers are telling us, this is what it's like to do business with you, both that final end consumer and our on the direct to consumer side, and then our B2B customers who were working directly with those end consumers. So relocation, corporate housing, these are all examples of we're going into someone's home, but your main customer is that relocation company, as an example. So, and they're renting furniture as they're doing their transition of their home prior to their sale, they're renting a place, etc. So, you're basically dealing with two customers. So understanding what their needs and desires are different. That soon to be new homeowner has a different take on what they need from us than the business partner. The business partner is like, I need to eat it. I need to see your capacity. I need to see your inventory. I need to see the pricing. I need to see what it looks like, because they're taking in feedback that I don't get directly until I'm going on that delivery. So tying that into my team's experiences of dealing with this inflow of information allowed us to identify the gaps in our system, the gaps in our processes. And one of the examples I would give is that we unintentionally were not as fast as we needed to be. Henry Ford has a great quote. If I had asked customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And that's what our customers ask for. We need you to be faster. Well, you need me to be faster at answering these basic questions, which was capacity, availability, what it looks like, and price. So by putting that online through technology, it allowed my team to focus on the larger and more difficult and questions. Hey, you don't normally go to this area. Can you go to this area on Wednesday? Instead of them focus their time on where is the truck, they could focus on that true handle the customer situation, that one-off, that exception. But it all started with, we had to listen and hear our customers, and then put in our processes and eliminate what I'll call the extra touch points. The extra touch points are, yeah, you can send me an email, but then we're having a conversation. Yes, you can call me, but you have to get out of your system to call me, and then you have to convey information. So what can we build between ourselves via technology, whether it be APIs, or you order directly from a portal, to answer the simple questions. So then you only are contacting me on the harder things. We eliminated those multiple touch points so that they could work on the harder stuff. I described it to the team as let's automate the simple so that I can really utilize all of your knowledge and experience. Brooke, the average tenure of the team was long, 15, 20 years. They knew the customers, they knew the process, they knew the product. But exceptions creep in over time. And we just had to go, what's actually an exception and what is something that we could, automate. So again, we could really take advantage of that true travel knowledge. So listening to the customers, listening to the team, and then focusing on, it wasn't really about removing steps of the process. It was refining the creep-ins that had happened over time, which happens to any company. And so once we got that down, we were able to lower our variable cost, improve our service times across the board. And, one of the variables was since you felt you needed more time, we only could do so many deliveries per truck per day. So we went from 2 deliveries to 4 deliveries a day on average within our trucks. And so when you think about you're moving someone's home and the average number of pieces is 21. So, a bedroom set, a dining room set, some kitchen table, etc., going from 2 to 4 stops, is incredible. And again, it lowers your impact of your fixed cost against it. The customers are happier because you can service them more. The team has, even though they have more touch points, they're not emergencies. It's just part of the process. And again, it enabled a lot of success. Our KPIs rose up. Our variable cost impact was decreased. Customers were happier. And again, it all started with truly understanding the impact of what the customers were asking for and how the team could receive it and work with it, and eliminating those, I'll call it those exception standpoints that pop up in every business that aren't really exceptions, but they feel like exceptions to the team overall. So, and that's where a lot of the success came from Brooke. And of course, there's no secret. That is really what you should do at any opportunity that you have across any business, regardless of size.
Sorry to interrupt. Just a quick mention of our long-standing partnership with Grata. As you will probably know, the private equity scene is constantly evolving, and deal flow is moving now to proprietary and data-driven processes. Grata provides you with the data and information of over 7 million private companies. So if you're looking to improve your proprietary deal flow and improve the data access, then reach out to Grata today. Now back to the podcast. And you mentioned obviously the financial constraints there, losing revenue with the pandemic, office furniture rental dropping. What did you tackle first with regards to the financial cost and mitigating what was obviously a significant risk there?
So, regardless of the pandemic, there's always times when you're going to experience a headwind in your verticals. And I'll give you another example. We serviced the Hollywood industries, whether it be behind the scenes furniture or even furniture for, on screen. And so when they went on their strike last summer, and, the East Coast Hollywood is Pinewood Studios and then Hollywood. So there was no activity. So, that was non-pandemic related. They finally come out of the pandemic, they're finally filming again, and the writers, et cetera, went on strike, and then there was no activity. So anytime you have a vertical that's having a headwind like that, the very first thing you do is you eliminate your cost touch points as much as you possibly can. And the first effort we did was how can we redeploy? So where is revenue coming in? How can I use that to go get more revenue? And that redeployment, it could be anything from, saying yes to business that you didn't have the capacity to say yes to before, which is the dream. Or it could be, we want to, basically give a discount or a coupon. Hey, give us more of your volume in this other vertical. Try us more often. I'll give you a volume discount. You got to get creative because you have your fixed costs and you can't cut your way to survival. At some point, you still need that team on a variable cost standpoint. So what you need to do is maximize what volume is available. Intense focus on touching it once and ensuring there's no additional cost points while you're trying to grow other verticals. And again, the Hollywood, strike example is a good one. It allowed us to really focus on some other verticals, and we did see some increases in those verticals. Our direct-to-consumer was a new vertical for us, and in 18 months, it became a significant portion of our revenue, literally starting from scratch. And so that allowed us to focus more time on that. Another one of our verticals, which I won't name, they do a lot of business with multiple furniture rental companies. It allowed us to really focus on them as well. And with them, everything's capacity. So having capacity in some markets that they potentially didn't see before allowed us to kind of fill those gaps. So was it painful? Yes. Did we expect it to last that long? No. But did we turn it into an advantage in terms of a focus on cost and the ability to grow the verticals? Yes. And it's the same thing we did in the pandemic as well. Just obviously the pandemic had some additional hurdles, which hopefully are that one time per 1,000-year black swan event, because those were definitely interesting times.
Let's certainly hope so that is the case. So Nathan, you've completed multiple acquisitions or add-on acquisitions during your career. What advice would you give to other portfolio execs with regards to what you've learned from these add-on acquisitions?
So there's two things that that I would always say, and it's what I always say to the team. Do we truly understand why we're talking about this? There are vertical integrations. You're doing an asset versus a stock sale, where you're basically buying the customer base or maybe just a portion of the company rather than the whole company, because that really ties into how you want to grow that revenue. So understanding why you're having the conversation and why you're doing it and it will enable you for success. The second piece is building in risk. So I'll give an example of, we were talking with someone doing an acquisition, and it was a competitor. So two competitors were sitting down at the table doing the due diligence. My math included that customers, even though they were shared customers, would potentially go to another one of our competitors during that time frame because they were nervous. There's going to be a service delay. I'm not going to know how to do this. There's going to be confusion. I'll just skip all of it and go over here. We built into our math and our conversation a 20% churn rate, and that's very high. But my point was, if we can survive and still make money and hit our goals with that 20% churn rate, and we'll go get those customers back if it happened, then we really know that we'll win. Because again, it was more than expected. Because if you're using that as example, if we could only afford a 5% churn rate, and then the actual turned out to be 7-8%, then your return, you could be losing money for a period of time. What if there's an integration problem? All those challenges that come up. And so make sure that you build risk into that model. Because if you truly understand the intent of why you're doing this acquisition or this merger, and then build in risk so that, and I don't want to call it an under-promise, over-perform type situation, but it's really what you want to do. Because nothing's worse than when you're like, we have a plan in terms of how we want to do this. This rate of return leads to this exit, which leads to this reward for this whole entire team, to basically even go back to the team, let alone the board, and say, the reward's less, or there's no reward because we took too long, spent too much money, or didn't do that. Those are not conversations that any of us want to have. Because again, everybody goes to work, they want to be successful during the day, right? They want to win. And that enables that team to get to that winning point very quickly because they get it and they've got risk built in.
What's your take on the integration side? Because that's something I'd see not done as well by private equity or portfolio executives. What have you done there to improve the odds that an integration will be successful?
And that goes back to my first point, is understanding why you're doing this in the first place. I referenced earlier in the conversation that from a technology standpoint, you have to make a decision on, you need a new system, but do you need everything right now? Are you going to potentially sell to a competitor? If you do they have the system that you need? So should you make that investment? So understanding why you're doing that merger or that acquisition is key, because it allows you to understand before you're going into the due diligence, the concept of how you would integrate. Because when you're doing due diligence, most people just compare the financials and then they're running the models and they're like, oh, we can grow the business by X, we expect this return by Y, and we expect it by Z timeframe. The challenge with that is, and that's where the PE runs into integration challenges, is that, well, this doesn't fit. And I'll give a perfect example. Salesforce is not equal, meaning that the way one company has implemented Salesforce is not always equal to the way another company. And you would think, oh, you're using Salesforce, I'm using Salesforce, but then you're trying to put your customer bases together and you got to go hire the Salesforce help to basically put them together. And so that becomes a cost point. And I'm not picking on Salesforce by any stretch. Let me be very clear. And I'm not saying they're expensive, but that's happened in an acquisition I did where I was like, they went this way with their integration and how they connected it. We went this way. And so it was more difficult to put the customer base together. One of us used Salesforce marketing, the other didn't. And that raised other integration questions. And again, that ties back to asking the questions on what do you expect from this? What is the end result? Then allows you during the due diligence to really ask the true integration questions. Because I will tell you in that room, we were like, oh, you use Salesforce? So do us. Check mark. And meanwhile, that's not the case at all. And again, I could say that across multiple systems, WMSs, TMSs, again, how you implement, how you use it, how you tie it to your systems, all, how you report from it, all could be different, even though it has the same name and the same banner across the board. And you got to build in that time. And again, understanding the end goal, in our instance, who actually was going to be the main Salesforce, who was going to be the main WMS, the main TMS, the main OMS, drives those integration points. And that's how you avoid you'll still have surprises because again, no due diligence can go through every touch point. But having an 80% solid plan and you're making adjustments to 20% of it is a lot better than the inverse, which is, you went through the check marks, you think the systems are the same, and then you're adjusting 80% of what you thought, because that takes more time, costs more money, and at some point, hopefully doesn't have a customer impact, but it could because the team is not sure on what to do, and that could take longer than expected.
So you've worked with billion-dollar companies right down to sub-$100 million businesses. Mm-hmm. What have you learned from working at the larger organizations that you've taken into working with some of the smaller revenue companies?
So the impact of technology and how it impacts the team, the larger companies, obviously, they will make larger investments in that. And so you get a lot of exposure. And where that exposure comes into play is not that you understand all the different technologies, but it's when to put a specific technology in at a smaller company. For example, I referenced the very manual company, but we needed new systems across the board, depending on what department you're talking to. But what department needed it first based on customer impact, based on revenue and profitability impact, that experience of understanding those pieces and call it integration, implementation, selection. Those experiences enabled me to be much faster at the smaller companies. Because again, the mistakes are huge at any company, but if you pick the wrong system, it's not that it won't work, but it won't work as well, has a larger impact at a smaller firm than it does a larger one, in terms of that timing piece and that success point. The second piece is that larger companies have a greater focus, from the get-go on process mapping, truly understanding the process and the touch points, which you'll see that on the smaller companies, especially the family-owned private ones, where the founder grew it from 100,000 to 50 million. For them that feels like 500 million, right? Because they've come so far, and it used to be two guys or two people in in their basement type situation. Well, now they have a team of people, they have, those other things. Have they really developed in terms of their own thinking, in terms of their own process? And have they developed a team as well? And one of the things that get missed in that lack of development is that process mapping. So you go in, and that's where you realize there really should be 10 steps in the process, and there's 12. And so bringing that process mapping discipline, understanding the impact of it, where you should do it first, I think is huge. And again, when I walk into any operation, does everybody understand the vision? Is the leadership team tied to the vision? Do you understand how that vision applies to you down to the brand new temporary employee potentially working in the operation, or the person answering the phone for the first time and hasn't been here for 30 years, all the way to the person who has been here for 30 years? How does that impact them? And again, that process mapping point, understanding what they do, allows us to be very efficient. So know your revenue, know your cost, the cost points, how to be successful with the customer, then you can focus on your revenue growth. So again, understanding the impact on CapEx. So, because you can't always, there is no blank checkbook anywhere, but there's certainly not on smaller companies. that understanding what to buy first and when and how to implement it. But that process mapping point, I think, would be a really big key because, again, that really ties to much quicker success points and employee satisfaction as well on those team members.
Not only am I the host of the Private Equity Podcast, I'm also the founder and managing partner of Raw Selection. Raw Selection's an executive search firm working exclusively within the private equity industry, supporting the portfolio companies and the private equity firms with securing exceptional talent with our motto of de-risking executive search. So on the process mapping was something we've implemented here, and we just use a simple Excel spreadsheet which documents every touch point, every motion, every step, every process. Are you using something more complicated than that? Would you recommend, or is that just keep it simple and map it out and then put your actions on the basis of the spreadsheet?
I have to tell you, I've been working, my last opportunity was, when we did process mapping, it was me, myself, and one other person type situation. And so it was the same thing. We went out and documented all the steps, put it into Excel, put out the flow, shared it with the team, and then basically tweaked it from there. One thing I'm excited about is that with all these advancements in AI, the opportunity to have to not to fight the little box in Excel type situation, I'm thrilled to death to be able to be like, hey, AI, here you go. I don't care if it's Copilot, Chat GPT, or something tied to your ERP system. The opportunity for that to basically flow it out for you is just going to even speed that up even more. So, I'm excited about that piece of it because, again, even in the larger companies I worked with, you do your homework before you go into the process rooms. And, even if you have a process engineer and IE assigned to you, they still need inputs. And so you're still at some point putting pen to paper, and it's traditionally what you just described, even to give to that IE so they have a starting point. Because they could write it down for you, but that takes time, especially if they're newer to the company or they're newer to that department, hadn't worked in that area before or hadn't worked extensively, giving them that kickoff point. So, regardless of my role, over time or my title, I've still been, writing it down, working with the team and putting it in Excel, just even for a kickoff point to hand it off to somebody else.
And you mentioned kind of moving the needle, looking at tech, what to implement first. Now that's something, we're considering here is, I use a pie analogy of what's the biggest pie that produces the biggest return on investment. How do you go about making decisions on, you mentioned where do we put the tech first into what division and what area, what needed? How do you go about making those decisions around what moves the needle first or what moves the needle the largest? Where do I spend my attention? Because a CEO's to-do list is incredibly long. So how do you differentiate from what needs your attention first and what moves the needle the most?
From a technology standpoint, most of my experiences have been tied around we should do the customer-facing items first. When you do the customer-facing items, it forces you to really look at your process because this is how the customers are interacting with your business. And so the more successes you can have, making it easier for them to do business with you, not only does it remove costs from the operation and the employees are happier because they're touching it less, it enables growth. It's a lot easier for the sales teams, regardless of whatever your portfolio company is offering. Using furniture rental as an example, the more when they would rent furniture, they were also renting an apartment or a home for that end user. They were also providing cable and internet services. So it was a full service suite, and we were one portion of that full service suite. So you can't be 10 steps when your competitor is 5, because they're going to give more business to your competitor because they already have so much they have to do on that B2B side to take care of that end user going into those homes. And so that's where that customer facing piece pays for itself very quickly or more quickly because it enables growth and it eliminates cost, because as you implement it, you're not going to implement all of the extra touch points that your manual process has, because the technology is faster. It already allows the customer to find information quicker. I use an analogy. When you're building a house, I don't want my electricians painting, and at Brooke, at customer service, some of the most common questions were very simple. Where's your truck? Are they going to be there by 2:00? And so the more we could put that online, which is what we did, we allowed them to have a track my truck feature so that they didn't have to call in it allowed my very smart, very experienced people, instead of answering that simple question, to work on the really hard stuff, right? Larger leases, unique situations, emergencies as they came up. And again, I want my electricians to be electricians, not to paint. And that's a perfect, I use that analogy all the time because it really helps the team understand you are valued, you are important. Let's use this technology as a tool to make it fast. And again, that customer facing piece is so important. You know, there is an argument that an ERP, as an example, is a customer facing point. But from an ERP standpoint, if the focus is on the OMS side, yes. But if the focus is on your back end office points, not so much, right? Because again, you're going to spend a lot of time setting that up. How are you focusing on your growth if within that ERP standpoint it's back office rather than the order management point, right? How is it coming in? How is the customer seeing it? Is it easy to do business with you? So again, I mean, I always approach it as what's the customer facing items we do first. And then once you understand that, you understand what comes next and then what you should be, I'll call it the what you're going to select and when you'll integrate it and how you'll integrate it kind of falls into that line as well.
What are your influences? What do you read? What do you watch? What do you listen to that you would recommend that others on the podcast or listening to the podcast check out?
So the book I always talk about, both in my personal life and in my business life, is The Fixed versus Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck. And so I'll use the personal example first. It's changed my thinking in terms of, I'm curious. I always ask lots of questions. It drives my wife and kids nuts, right? But even on my personal life, my children are 20 and 17, both my daughters, and math is not their favorite. And so the expectation is I expect them to get A's. But, the fixed versus growth mindset asks the great questions. Did you learn? Can you apply this next? Did you put the effort in? Did you learn how, when you put the effort in, did you learn from this? And the reason why is because people aren't going to be perfect in anything, in business or in life. And I love that that phrasing to be like, hey, let's be in a growth mindset about this. It allows the focus also to change from, well, who screwed this up to, hey, what happened? And that change of tone is huge because I don't care whose fault it is. If you had the data, you looked at it, you made a decision, and you were wrong, okay, me too, right? I'm there. I work there too. I'm part of the team. I didn't catch it. I screwed up too. So let's not focus on that. Let's focus on, okay, well, what did we learn? First off, let's go fix it. And then what did we learn? So I love that book because it applies so well to the constant learning cycle, asking questions in a different tone. And when the team embraces that mindset, that growth mindset, that like, hey, I know I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not worried about being in trouble because I'm all in. It allows the company to be more successful more quickly. You'll see siloed companies when things aren't going well do a lot of finger pointing, and it's not because they dislike their coworkers. It's because they're like, well, I don't want to be the one that's causing the pain. I don't want to be in trouble. I'm successful, right? Can you see it? So when you eliminate those barriers, the teams can have real conversations. And in Proverbs, as the Bible says, as iron sharpens iron, have those real conversations because we're not worried about fault and focusing because that growth standpoint. So I'm a huge proponent. I've passed out that book to numerous teams over the years. So that's a good one. A couple other books that I really enjoy. What Got You Here Won't Get You There. I actually reread that every couple of years because that was given to me early in my career. And that's by Marshall Goldsmith. And it was a great turning point for my career because it was the first time I went from a director to a VP to a senior VP role in a very short period of time. And they're like, you're good, but are you a good leader? And they said, start with this book and then we'll keep talking. And it was a mentor that did that. And I appreciate him forever for doing that. I always advise that book because no matter how experienced you get in your career, asking those questions that he asked within the book are fantastic. So, and then from a team standpoint, my favorite team book is Jocko Willnick's Extreme Ownership. I just love the fact that he took probably one of the worst situations. I mean, it's war, people are shooting at you, and it was still a team dynamic for them to be successful, meaning stay alive. They needed to work together. And you would think that those teams would be motivated to work together, and they were, but the communication breakdowns and when they communicated and how and the delivery of it. And again, there was no, I'm not going to call it animosity. It was just, it's a tough situation. Learning to communicate in those situations have impact points in the business world about how we can better communicate and work together as a team. So, and of course, if you ever seen Jocko on his podcast or live and in person, I've seen him live in person speak several times. I mean, it's just motivating, right? The man is just, he vibrates with so much energy. So he's one of my podcasts that I listen to too. But my two favorite podcasts, just to let everybody know, is the Founders podcast with David Senra. I don't know if you've heard of it. He reads the autobiographies and then he pulls out from the autobiographies what made those people successful across all industries, right? So one of the more recent ones was he did Walt Disney, and if you think about what Walt Disney did, he went from being a cartoonist to what Walt Disney is today and building these theme parks that didn't exist before he created them type situation. His lessons learned, his emphasis on his energy about, his vision and his dream. There's always just something you can learn. And he does not just, we'll call it traditional business people. It's all the way across the spectrum, both in politics, business, athletics. So I enjoy that. And then the Knowledge Podcast. The Knowledge Podcast it touches business, decisions, motivations, diet. It just basically is just knowledge. So think of it as a different version of a TED Talk. What I enjoy about it is that it's a little more wide ranging, and it's a different digestible format. But I like that because it just challenges, call it preconceived notions, and it's just very educational. And both of those podcasts are easy to listen to, and the time flies by basically in terms of I usually do it when I'm exercising. So those 30-40 minutes, hour, would just makes that time where I'm either walking the dog or on the treadmill go a little bit faster.
Appreciate that. There's a few recommendations in there which are new to me, so I'll definitely be checking that out. If anybody wishes to reach out to you, Nathan, post this podcast, how best to do so, please?
So, they're always welcome to reach out in my personal email, which is nksanders@att.net. And also, if you go to LinkedIn, if you go to the contact info, my email is there as well. And of course, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I post items talking about leadership, technology, growth, etc. So if anybody wants to see some additional insights into my brain, they can see my LinkedIn profile, and it has my contact info there as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Nathan, giving us an insight into running a private equity-backed business, growing that business, developing it, and obviously taking it to an exit and all the bits in between. So really appreciate your insight today.
I appreciate you having me. This has been wonderful. Thank you, sir.
And for everybody listening, if you've not already, please do subscribe to the Private Equity Podcast. You'll be notified the next one that comes out, which is every single week. But till the next time, keep smashing it. And thank you very much for listening.